Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Dirty South Security Podcast. My name is Tony UV, and I'm joined here today by Dan Tentler for a great topic. We have a lot of different things to cover. The topic for today's episode is small firms, big impact, why offensive security matters more than ever. So let's get started with introductions, Dan. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You have quite the extensive background. First off, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, because you're an entrepreneur like me, and you're running a successful cybersecurity consulting practice out on the West Coast, right? Is that correct?
That's right. We're in San Diego.
Absolutely. And so tell us a little bit about you've had a we're kind of the same age. I think I might be just 4 years older than you, but tell for the viewers out there just a really quick, a little bit about yourself. What's your kind of main focus at Phobos?
So Phobos Group is basically a custom tailor sort of boutique shop. Rather than sort of churn out the cheapest possible pen tests available, which is sort of the soup du jour, we take all the actual interesting stuff on the sort of frayed edges where most of our clients are folks that care about security and find themselves kept up at night by some problems that they don't know how to handle or can't deal with. And while larger firms are throwing dozens of expensive consultants with the alphabet soup in their email signature, or they're trying their hand at like rubbing AI on the problem to see if that fixes it, at the end of the day, like the way that I like to phrase it the best is like, who do you think would be a better car thief? Some kid that watched a handful of YouTube videos, or a mechanic that's been working on cars for 20 years?
Right.
So like, if you've been in it, if you've been elbow deep or even eyeball deep in computer security, whether you're an attacker or a defender for as long as we have, you just know stuff. And at some point, you start seeing patterns and things start to repeat. And so what we bring to the table is that level of expertise and that depth of experience, and that our solution to stuff isn't let's see what Google says or let's see what ChatGPT says. It's, oh, I've done this 15 times already at these other places, and here's all the nuances. If you were to take all that experience and put it onto a Venn diagram, those awesome little outside crescents on the very edges are where all the cool stuff lives.
Yep.
All the stuff that doesn't overlap. And the more experience you have, the more interesting that Venn diagram gets. And that's not something compliance can ever do for you. It's not something GRC can ever do for you. It's if you're worried about, for example, the news this week, right, is F5 the new SolarWinds?
Yeah.
Now that the entire corpus of their source code has been leaked, how do you grapple with that? Like, just from a top-down perspective, like, we have a whole bunch of F5s in production. Now what? Well, if you've been doing this for long enough, you were around for SolarWinds. You were around to see what Phineas Fisher did to Hacking Team. You were around when Equifax happened. You were around when Sony Pictures happened. Like,
Yeah.
there are patterns, and they are repeating, and that's the big difference.
Well, before we, free dive 250 meters deep into that water, I want to I want to cover a couple of housekeeping. So big shout out to Versprite for sponsoring the podcast and the equipment. Thanks to you, Dan, for being out here. Like any good relationship, we started basically breaking bread in San Diego at the end of the Offensive AI Con, which was a great conference and great to have a chance to meet. Shout out to Rob Reagan for hooking up the introductions. And so, I was looking at your background, Dan, and I wanted to have you on the podcast because I was talking to you that night at the dinner table, and I was like, we have a lot of similarities in terms of how we think about how security should be applied, how the market is rewarding mediocrity. So today's really talking, we have a lot to cover, so I want to definitely jump in, is really on, talking about both offensive security, where it is today, where it's going, maybe on the heels of, the Offensive AI Con. We talked about a lot of the stuff, together, but also too, in terms of like the market, right? You and I, we run cybersecurity firms, and it's a grind, right? To be able to market value, we got to jump higher, we got to run faster than the bigger dinosaurs that are more lethargic, that are doing cookie cutter, right, type stuff. We'll get into that in a second. Let's start out by having the conversation on segment one, the boutique advantage. Why small firms eat last and why that's actually good. So let's start with the brutal reality of small firms. Procurement, right? The dirty P word.
Oh
I
boy.
mean, getting into some of these places, like as compared to like a bigger shop that's going to cookie cut their way and maybe, pay to play type of model. What are some of the kind of scar tissues that you can reveal on getting onboarded, via procurements on some of the companies that you've served over, the past, 20 years plus?
Sure. So it's kind of a mixed bag, right? So the easiest way to explain it, like the easiest way to to elucidate it for folks that have never had to deal with that aspect of things before, is it's essentially a hazing ritual. It's
Yep.
designed for companies. Companies have a rule set. So like if you've ever had to deal with an RFP, our RFPs are a great example of this sort of behavior where a company wants a security assessment. They are bound by regulatory compliance or laws or corporate policy or what have you, right? There's a bunch of stanchions or, chalk on the ground, however strong or weak their, those policies are. They force the person trying to do the acquisition into a certain funnel. Most of the time they know who they want, but they are forced to, for example, make a public RFP. And you have to go through this RFP process. And in some cases, they turn you into sort of a sacrificial lamb. So for example, Phobos turns 10 in February, and we have been around long enough that we are fairly well known, but folks they like using their ancient, tried and true, pen test companies that have been around for 20, 30 years. And so they know that they want the org that they're looking for, but they're required to get 3 quotes, or they're required to run an RFP program. And so if you turn away an RFP, or if you get snippy and give a customer attitude when you're asked to submit a quote, then it makes you look bad. But the problem is that what's really happening through all the subterfuge is you're being made to jump through hoops at your own expense for somebody else's comfort, so that they can have the vendor they want, so that they can get their 3 quotes. And so we have to, and I'm sure you have to deal with that as well, but there's usually like end of Q1, midway through Q2 is like pen test season, where suddenly we get what I call them tire kickers. They come around, they do the scoping call, they ask for a statement of work, and that takes time. It's hours out of the day, it's dedicated time. And then you produce this, meticulously premed statement of work, you send it across to them, and then you just never hear from them again. And I guess I chalk it up to the cost of doing business. And procurement departments are even worse, because procurement departments will handle that sort of thing with prejudice, in that they know that they have the high ground, and they know that if you want the business, you have to jump when they say jump. And sometimes they make absurd and ridiculous demands. For example, right now we're working on one procurement with a company here in town, actually, that we've been trying to get through their procurement department for, at this point, over a full calendar year. We began the process last September. I don't know how many hours of free work we've had to dish out to prove to them that we're still interested. We've rejiggered the statement of work at least a dozen times. I don't know how many conference calls there have been. But basically, at this point, we just get the impression that we're just being milked for free work at the.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
They're jingling the car keys, and they're like, "Oh, here's the Lamborghini. If you can get the Lamborghini, all you got to do is reach up and get the Lamborghini." And then we're never going to get it. They're just going to keep milking us. And so, at some point, we're going to.
For the brotherhood and sisterhood of entrepreneurs out there in cybersecurity, I wanted to, I think there's a lot of gold that you put down right there. I wanted to add to it and simply say, you're right. RFPs, are very burdensome. It is very ritualistic. It puts a lot of pressure, as you mentioned, Dan, on the participant to be able to, put down their financial status, right? Their, history of work in that same segment, doing that same type of project and stuff like that. All for maybe not getting in at all, right? So you just spent literally weeks bullying all that together. Some additional things that you put down, I just want to add on to, is that many RFPs are built with already somebody in mind, right? So procurement they're shopping, right? They're the shoppers of corporate entities, and they're shopping so that they can get the best bang for the buck. They're not cybersecurity practitioners. They don't care to be. What they are is they're like, they're shopping cartel within organizations, and they're trying to make sure that they can squeeze every sort of like cent, so that for every line item in that RFP, that they're getting basically the best bang for the buck. Hey, kudos to them. This is what they're built for. This is what their profession is. So I'm not going to hate on them if they're just trying to stay, because they probably get compensated and get bonuses off of that, presumably. So that's just the brutal reality. But moving on to the next topic on that, I wanted to talk about the realities of what we have seen as part of the brutal reality of small versus large. And like I said, hopefully this is valuable to all of the companies that are out there that have taken the plunge. They're entrepreneurs like you and I, Dan. The checkbox approach, right? So there's actual security, and then there's checkbox security. To me, checkbox security is the one that's stealing the show, because they get the bigger marketing budgets, right? They're whining and dining and paying to play and sponsoring like just another zillion CISO awards out there, right? And and they basically are getting away with checkbox approach. But how come we haven't seen like the realities of what we do, the passion, the drive, the commitment, right? The methodology, the attention to detail? Why hasn't that stuck as like the predominant winner in the market?
How much does a Lamborghini cost? 400K, 500K,
About
something like that? Okay. What if I told you can get one for 80 grand? Would you buy a Lamborghini for 80 grand? Does that sound enticing? Does that sound cool? A brand new, right off the lot Lamborghini. Caveat,
yeah,
no brakes, no airbags, no seat belts, no crumple zones. So if you drive it, you're going to die. Like pretty much period. If you drive it, you're going to die. It's guaranteed. You take that thing on the freeway, you're going to be salsa. There will be people, if you made this car, there would be people lined up around the block to buy it, because they could say they had a Lamborghini. And many of them will leave that Lamborghini in the garage, and they'll never actually drive it, so they may not die.
right.
So that's the trade-off. Checkbox security is the absolute least possible amount of work that you can get away with to legally do business in the vertical. If you're in finance, then it's FINRA, FISMA, probably SOX. It's like, for example, the SOX language about pen tests and security. The last time I looked at it, it was essentially like several sentences that basically said you have to get a pen test from a third party.
Right.
It doesn't say what you have to do with it. It doesn't just say you have to fix any of the problems that you find. It doesn't specify from who or how long it needs to be or what it needs to cover. And so the practice of checkbox security is the intentional whittling down to the tiniest, most worthless, insignificant thing that they can possibly get away with, that in many cases isn't actually even legal. Whatever they can get away with is called a pen test, and that goes into a drawer. And then when Deloitte or KPMG, whoever comes around to do the assessment, they pull that thing out and go, look, we got a pen test. The box gets checked, and that report goes back into the drawer. And so, like, so far as I understand it, the number one cause of burnout in this industry is people who don't feel like their jobs matter to them, or not to them, but to their employer.
That's a predominant feeling. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so if you're putting your heart and soul into your work, and the result of that is a report that nobody actually looks at because nobody actually cares, and to quote several people that I have talked to in the past that have this sentiment, if you go back to the same customer 3 years in a row and the only thing that changes on the report is the date, that is incredibly demoralizing. It means that nobody's looking at the report, nobody's fixing the report, nobody cares what's in it. And so if nobody gets in trouble for not doing that, then what's that phrase? Lack of consequences is permission. Mm-hmm. So if nobody's getting dinged for behaving this way, then that is incentive to continue behaving that way. And if people who are doing the work, like the pen testers of the world, are getting disheartened and quitting, if nobody reads the report anyway, then why don't you just have ChatGPT write the entire thing? Because who cares?
Right.
And so, like, if there aren't consequences, it is not only enabling, but it is encouraging this kind of behavior. And so what we're seeing as people who actually care is we're like the violinists on the deck of the Titanic. Like, things are going down, and all we can do is keep doing our thing, because like we're all on the same boat, and the boat's sadly not going the direction we want. It's supposed to be going to shore, but instead it's going down.
That's been a long sink for the past 20 years. I mean, like at this point, you and I are both playing the violin, and we're just looking for the whole thing to be over with, right? But
Yeah.
I felt those body shots. You dropped a couple names into there in terms of outfits. It's funny. There was a news piece, and I think it was out of Australia, where like Deloitte was fined $400,000 for largely making recommendations that were straight out of like a Chat GPT like result,
Yep.
right? I think you saw that one. We talked about it over dinner, I think.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is that like the reality that you can get, that the value of the Lamborghini is there, right? So it brings up like the point of like why CISOs choose safe failures over risky wins. I got to give a shout out to an individual actually here in Atlanta. He's been an executive for the past 30 years, and this is a real story on Versprite. I mean, when you stick your neck out for a small firm like Phobos or Versprite or whatever, but you're gonna get like that Lamborghini product, right? Where there's quality, there's passion, there's curiosity. I remember when, we read like RFC specs on protocols that might be net new for a particular type of, let's say, product that we're basically engaging on. And that level of analysis or pre-preparatory, like, testing isn't really done from the bigger smash and grab shops. So why is it that, you have CISOs? There's this guy I wanted to give a shout out to. I will call him Mr. High. And Mr. High in Atlanta, he stuck his neck out, for Versprite and brought us into one of the top largest organizations in the world. Why is it though that there's less people like Mr. High and there's more people, we'll just make them up and call them Mr. Low, where they don't want to actually bring in shops that are taking the right approach, the right methodology to find issues that really matter to the product or the organization? Why do you think that is?
So have you ever heard, you've probably heard the term perverse incentives.
Yes.
Okay, so perverse incentives, for anybody listening that has never heard the term or wants clarity, is that the people who are in charge of security are not incentivized by doing security. They don't get rewarded because the company doesn't get hacked. They don't get rewarded because they aren't a SolarWinds or they aren't a Sony Pictures or they aren't a Target or they aren't like
Right.
What was the last one? Oracle just got turned inside out. F5 this week is the big right. News this week. F5 is going to be the new SolarWinds or whatever. How is it that happens? Well, it's because the people that do security, the leadership of those organizations, they are not rewarded for being safe and doing things right the way you and I would consider doing things right from a security perspective. They're rewarded by shipping units and sales numbers, and in very large part, the CISOs and in many cases the CIOs, if there isn't a CISO, and depending on their org structure, they're rewarded by market performance. If they're a publicly traded company, did the stock do well? Did their quarterly numbers look good? Were the investors happy? Did they get a bump, in the market? Like, did CNBC give them a hat tip? That sort of thing. That's how they get rewarded. And so those folks get paid in stock, or they get paid in options, or they get paid in equity. And so their behavior is, for many years, I call them what I call the meat shield CISO. They come in, they don't rock the boat, they collect their bonuses, they hang out for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then they punch out and go to the next shop and do the same thing. They're the type of folks that will go into a place and actively prohibit their direct reports from doing anything that their direct reports passionately believe that will fix security at the organization, because swapping out ancient Junipers for new Palos, or upgrading from PHP to like Rust, or pick your poison of like 5 dozen different potential trivial slam dunk, home run, easy low ball wins. None of this, it all gets squashed. They don't allow any of it to happen because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be in charge if the upgrade doesn't go right. And in many, many cases, these people are not technically competent enough to wrap their heads around what they are poo-pooing. They're not like, I've seen people that were like literally ex-sales people for Nike, like ex-shoe salesmen,
right,
who are now CISOs.
Yes.
Like, what in the actual fuck? What in every single possible iota of fuck? How in the fuck? What the fuck? Like, how do you, as a board of directors, take somebody that's a shoe salesman and say that person needs to be our CISO.
Right.
What are you thinking? And the answer is they're not thinking about security. They're thinking about somebody that made Nike's numbers look good. They're looking at Nike's quarter-over-quarter profits.
That's exactly right.
And so like perverse incentives, that is like the foundation upon which all this bullshit pyramid is stacked.
So at this point, Dan, you and I have basically dissuaded every cybersecurity entrepreneur from continue on this long journey that you and I have taken. So I want to flip it because we're going to take the positive side of things right now, because we actually have bigger advantages than the bigger shops. But I agree with everything you said, and I think just to kind of close out your last point, it's on the optics. One thing that real passionate security people don't do well inherently is messaging and portrayal. And so, from the business side, right? From the business side. So translating the impact of what security things that we find into the business aspect of what the business is trying to do, whether it be to grow market share, defend market share, protect IP, things that actually matter to the street. But going back to you and I, right, as entrepreneurs that have taken the plunge, and before people leave the Dirty South Security Pocket, by the way, the beauty about this show is that we didn't dive into pleasantries, none of that bullshit. We dove into the heart. This is the Dirty South Security Podcast. This is what we're about. Let's talk about our unfair advantages or fair advantages, right? Speed and adaptability. You and I have a vested interest. We're passionate. We've been doing this for a long time. We got skin in the game. We also have a lot to lose, right? You and your team, they basically go wayward on something, you're done. It's game over for Phobos, game over for Versprite. Like we're rolling dices every single day that could cripple all the people that are associated with us versus like, okay, the Deloitte situation with the $400,000 like chargeback that they'll give like that Australian entity, that's like nothing. That's like crumbs on the table for them, right? Yeah. So what are some unfair advantages that you feel that can now motivate those depressed, and it's 5:00 somewhere, they're probably hitting a shot or two of something just to take off the edge of what we've been talking about for the past 20 minutes. But what are some positive things that you feel that make us to be a lot more deadly and competitive compared to those big dinosaurs that are not as innovative?
It's the same reason that you get an advantage when you like rejigger a motherboard, or you move the RAM closer to the CPU, or you do a system on a chip kind of thing where you have like all your chipsets on one die.
Right.
Parts are closer together. There's less bureaucracy. There's less bureaucracy. There's less switching, store and forward in between the decision-making process. So for a larger organization, we already talked about procurement and how wonderful and flowery and amazing they are. We don't have to deal with that. If you or I want to make a decision, we just make the decision. It means that, there aren't necessarily people to look over our shoulder to warn us if we're doing something scary or bad or not. We don't have to push stuff through legal. We don't have to push stuff through various other departments. We don't have to wait for somebody who's on leave to come back to authorize something. There is next to no red tape for us. We've been doing this stuff long enough to know how it needs to happen, and that gives us magnitudes of order, better speed and reliability and response time. So if we get a phone call and one of our customers says that they're in trouble, it's not like, oop, it's 4:59.
Right.
You're gonna have to wait till tomorrow. No, we're working late that day, and so that's something that people appreciate. And so we're here to fix legitimate, tangible, real problems. And so that's why we get that phone call. We don't get the phone call of, hey, what can I get for $2,000? Can you make sure that I pass Sarbanes-Oxley? They call us and say, we want to swap out our F5s, but we don't have $500K to drop on Palos. What do we do? And you get to do all that out for them. And that's something that people come to us for because they trust us for that sort of thing. And so when you go to a giant VAR, the giant VAR, in many cases, the folks you're talking to are not technical enough. They don't know about the nuts and bolts. They're not well enough schooled in the different flavors of tooling that exist, and they're not in a position to immediately off the cuff say, oh, based on what you're doing, based on your tunnels, based on your remote offices, based on your remote staff, based on the load, whether you're in the cloud or not in the cloud, or moving to or from the cloud, or how many data centers you have, like they're not in a position to say, oh, based on what I remember your network map to be, I would go with this vendor over that vendor because of these reasons. They would be like, okay, let me go to my team and see, and that becomes like a 2-week process, because the team is a bunch of people that have never touched computers before but have alphabet soup in their email signatures, and so they're asking ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is just making up products to suggest. And so since nobody can tell those products don't actually exist, and nobody's looking up, nobody's like checking that response for BS, that response goes to the customer. And then now the customer gets this response from some well-known vendor full of equipment that doesn't exist. And now they're like, okay, well, I'm not sure how to grapple with this because I have a real problem, and you made me wait for a week. And now that the week is over, you've given me a bunch of word salad that doesn't make sense and suggests products that don't exist.
I forgot to tell you, Dan, that I have PTSD when someone says the word VAR.
Sorry.
So I had to take some medication. I don't know if you saw me. I had to just inject something really quick. But I wanted to ask you, like, real talk, have you ever thought about using a VAR for what you guys have been doing?
So we adamantly tell people that we are not a VAR, and we will make suggestions.
No, but think about using a VAR like upstream to kind of like, broaden the footprint of Phobos and what you guys do.
We tried to talk to a couple like years ago, but it was one of those, like, they want to get their hooks in you and then they want to abuse you. And so, like,
sounds like a pop song.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But the ones that we talked to basically tried to convince us that we should stop doing security consulting work and we should just become their salespeople.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
They started making demands of like, oh, if you want to use our services to service your customers, then we're going to saddle you with these quotas, and you need to be able to sell X number of these units or X number of these licenses. And we're like, that's not why we came to see you. We're not in the business of selling other people's equipment. We're in the business of telling people how to fix problems that we find. Right. And from time to time that involves buying equipment, but it's not every single time. And so we can't necessarily commit to these quotas that you're saddling us with, because we're not sales guys. Like, we're not here doing selling, we're doing security. And as a side effect of that, sometimes selling happens, and we need somebody to be there for that sometimes when that selling happens. And their answer to us was basically like, you don't meet our minimums, stop wasting our time, go away. And we tried it with like 3 different VARs, and then we just gave up. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we're messing with the audience tonight, because now they're again back to being depressed, just like I've been right now. We're just talking about VARs, but VARs are a real thing. There's a lot of companies that, if you're an entrepreneur on the product side or the services side, you use VARs, or you try to. I haven't had success either with VARs because of all the reasons that you mentioned and more. They really kind of cheapen the passion and the value proposition of that smaller company in selling to the customer base. But let's move away from all that. Let's go into the psychological really quick. So segment 2 is about offensive security, not just pen testing. Let's try to get through this pretty quickly because we still got 2 other segments to cover. So let's talk about, the attacker mindset. At Adversary, we have this philosophy that's been around for since the inception of the company, is like, think like a criminal, not think like a black hat. I don't actually like the word black hat because I think that the black hat terminology is still too soft. I want to think like a criminal, like a real criminal, individual actor, syndicate, nation state, right? And so let's talk about the psychology of the philosophy around offensive security for a second, Dan. Attacker mindset as a business philosophy. Now, pair that with pen tests, right? And the parameters of how most pen tests are bought. We talked a little bit about this already. But also, with that attacker mindset as a business philosophy, Let me just ask you point blank, Dan, what percent of buyers, and not just now, but even before, just in the history, because you've worked at a lot of different outfits in different notable players in the industry, what percent would you say have that attacker mindset as a business philosophy when buying offensive security?
Very few. I would
Yes,
say if you're lucky, if maybe 10%,
agreed,
maybe 1 out of 10.
agreed.
In like when I worked for Twitter, actually, when I worked for Sempra, it was the same sort of flavor. Part of my job at both of those places was doing, we call them vendor security reviews or vendor
Hmm.
audits. The idea
Oh yeah,
was some business unit wants to buy some new widget, some new thing. And my job was to evaluate the vendor and make a determination of, is it safe for us to use them for things? And I would like the previous to me in both circumstances, the uh, mode that they did that with was to send the vendor a spreadsheet with a bunch of questions, and the vendor would respond in the spreadsheet, and then they would use those answers as like the truth. That was their
right.
sort of ground of being. Um, and the way I described it was you send a spreadsheet to a vendor, they fill it full of lies, and then that fulfills a checkbox. And so what I started doing was actually running tiny assessments on these places. And I would say like, well, we're going to acquire, like in Twitter's case, we're going to acquire Crashlytics or Bluefin Analytics, and those two
Hmm.
got glued together to become what became in Twitter Analytics. But like we were given like 3 days to do assessments for both of those customer or not customers, both of those companies.
Yeah, vendors. Yeah.
I thought it was insufficient, but in 3 days, that was like three 16-hour days where we were just going breakneck speeds trying to find everything we possibly could about these places so that we could produce a risk profile for leadership to say, based on what we're seeing, this is what we're in for if we acquire this company, and this is what we're going to have to deal with because their infrastructure is going to become our infrastructure, and we're going to have to deal with the remediation of all of this stuff. And so, on the one hand, the business tends to be happy with just whatever gets put into the spreadsheet. But
Right.
what really happens when the rubber hits the road is that when these companies get glued together, or when the big company acquires a smaller company, like all that stuff that is the smaller company is now the bigger company's responsibility, and somebody is going to have to deal with it. And it gets interesting when the people that are making the decisions of what to buy and how to buy it, or what the go no go scenario is, they're very like Grand Canyon disconnected from the people that will have to endure dealing with whatever that equipment is, or whatever that subscriptions or licenses or cloud environments are, or whenever they land. And so I think it's a very big case of the people who make the decisions are not the people that have to deal with the consequences. And so it varies from company to company, right? So in some orgs, you have the Nike shoe salesman who's in charge, and that guy doesn't care. He just wants to get paid. He wants the numbers. He wants the chart to go up and to the right. He wants Kramer to run around screaming with what's left of his hair on fire about how great that stock is. But then there's other folks that have been, in it, that got promoted up to CISO, that understand the consequences of bringing in a dump truck on fire worth of equipment and saying, well, now our guys are going to have to stop what they're doing day to day, whatever projects they're working on, and just deal with this gigantic trash fire.
Yep.
So it varies from shop to shop.
Well, let me ask you another question. I agree with your assessment, Dan. I think that overall there's a minutia of buyers out there that are really having this attacker mindset and kind of mixing it with the psychology of business, right? And so I agree with you, and it's unfortunate. But let me ask you this: when it comes to those that are in the practice of delivering offensive services, how well would you rate their services in alignment to actual real world attack patterns that are happening by real threat actors, right? Would you say that it is, emulating 50% of what's out there or 20%? I mean, I'm not going to put words into your mouth. I have my own kind of preconceptions there, but I'm curious to get your thoughts.
So that's a moving target, and that's a really good question, because it's this weird amorphous blob sliding along the ground, right? So like was it this week or last week, whatever. It's not scanning. It's not, what do you call it? It's not scattered spider anymore. Now it's scattered shiny lapsus
Right.
hunters
Yeah.
or something to that
Right.
effect. They keep changing the name. And so like, all right, cool. How do we emulate them? They changed their name last week. Like the only TTPs that we have from them are, whatever we've seen in the last week with the people posting screenshots of Telegram channels and whatnot. But like, we don't know enough. Like,
but if you could disassociate the actual names and just look at the patterns,
sure.
Industry to patterns observed, how well do you feel that offensive security practices are emulating these actual observed patterns?
I'd say that there is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a dozen shops like ours that pay attention and try to emulate as closely as possible.
Right.
But then there's the very long tail of other organizations, both big and small, that, for example, when attack surface management came about, you saw every company that made a vulnerability management appliance take a chisel and scrape off the vulnerability management sticker from the front of their appliance and slap on a new ASM sticker, and they just renamed it.
Yep.
So there's a ton of that, right? And so you'll see like there's companies that say, oh, we use AI to emulate blah blah blah, or we have like some sort of binary solution where you download a thing and then like it just runs through some TTPs that like we have pre-programmed, and it just blindly fires a bunch of IOCs out, and we see if your sensors see the IOCs. And it's like, I don't think that you're being honest with your customers if you are taking that approach, because you're telling them that you're emulating real threats that are a moving target, but what you're actually delivering is like some stuff that an IDS saw that might, if you're lucky, be 10% of what actually happened.
Yeah.
So like, I say that the number of people that are authentically and honestly performing like adversary emulation, like attack simulations, is small, but there's a lot of people that are like riding our respective coattails in that when we do something cool and it makes the news, or if we do a write-up and it gets a bit of like a bump in the press or whatever, they're not quite ambulance chasers because there's not an ambulance, but there's a lot of sort of copycats where like if you do something cool, 3 months later, 5 other shops that do the checkboxy type work are just copying the language out of your blog post.
Absolutely. That's the nature of biz, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this just to kind of close this out. This is a kind of a simple question. What's your good or bad thoughts around purple teams?
If deployed correctly, they're very, very effective, because essentially that's been my entire career. Like on the one hand, 1 minute I'm on the blue team and I'm doing like at Twitter, it was bizarre. I was the only person on the team whose title was red team, but like half of my job was incident response. And not because that was like assigned, but that was just because I kept getting pulled into the incident response because I'd been familiar with that sort of thing. And then, then I'll go to Sempra Energy, and then at Sempra I'm entirely blue team, engineering side of stuff. And then I go to Carbon Dynamics and I'm the red team guy. And then now I'm at Phobos and now I do kind of all of it. And so the way I describe it is, where the blue team and the red team are both looking at the same physical object, but they're looking at different sides of it, so it's illuminated from different places. And so if the people on both of those teams start walking in circles around this object, you get a better view of what the other team is dealing with. And at the end of the day, as a red team, your job is to help the customer be more secure. As the red team, your job is to basically make work for the blue team. And so if you're the blue team, then you know what work you need, and you know where you would like the red team to go. And if you're the red team, then you know how the blue team works and how to get around the blue team. And so this continual sort of back and forth of being in one position and then the other gives you some degree of clairvoyance in that, again, patterns tend to repeat. You start seeing people behave the same sort of way, and that if deployed correctly, a purple team can be incredibly effective because you have a lot of red team mentality, a lot of attacker mindset on the defensive side of things. And then if you swap that, then you have like the defenders working for the attackers. Now the attackers could do things like hide from the blue team and use MTLS to hide C2 infrastructure, or blend into customer ISP flavored proxy networks, or pick your poison. So like,
right.
people switching teams back and forth a lot makes everyone smarter and makes everyone think the other side is doing something cool. And there's a bit of that FOMO where, like, if the red team thinks the blue team is doing some cool new detection thing, they're going to want to know about it because they're going to want to figure out how to avoid it. And if they go to that team and learn how it works, they go, ooh, and then they go back to the red team and now they have a new avoidance, like proxy avoidance, some sort of bypass thing that they can cobble together. And then it's like the one-upmanship of like AMD, then NVIDIA, then AMD, then NVIDIA, then who makes the better video card. But it's the same thing, and the end result is everyone gets smarter as this process goes on. So
that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I like the fact that, you know, the teams get to switch up, right? They get to play offense, they get to play defense. I think that's a good perspective. We do a different take. We build a pasta threat model. The red team has one, the blue team has one, and they're both basically kind of like there's their blueprint for offense, defense. The purple team is like spying on both threat models, and then the red team launches their offensive attack patterns to support the threat objectives. Like the threat objective is like, I want to persist and live in your environment. All right, great. That's one objective of, let's say, 5. And then you marry the attacks to the threats, and then you kind of compare notes at the end and see who got past what. Did something fire off, not fire off? The red team can basically say, oh, wow, this worked well, and no one knew any better. And the blue team was like, wow, we shit the bed on this one, but we actually found him here, and we were able to do active mitigation, you know, and catch him real time. But, you know, I think that overall I agree with you. Purple teams are valuable. I just had to ask because, you know, we're in the offensive part. It's not just offensive security is not just pen testing. There's a lot to it. There could probably be 5 shows in one. But let's go to segment 3. You mentioned AI. There's a couple different, table stakes on the table for this conversation. Let's begin with something really simple. Like, you know, do you think that AI right now is going to be more of an impact for attackers or defenders? And define impact.
Yes. So
you have to pick one. You can't. You have to. If you were to pick one, I mean, we both know it's going to have an impact to both. Yeah, so that's a given. But of the two, offense and defense, what do you think that AI is an inflection point, you know, in terms of like it really expanding the opportunities to do more in that specific realm? What do you think is going to have a bigger impact on?
So since you said impact and you didn't necessarily qualify it with a positive or a negative impact, the most measurable thing that I think is going to happen is that people are going to prematurely deploy on the defensive side of things tons and tons and tons of AI solutions that are not backed by humans. And they're just going to say, like, let the AI do stuff. Let the AI be the SIM. Let the AI do the firewalling. And let the AI read the logs.
Autonomous socks. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just the building's going to burn down. Like it's because the thing that was discovered like 3 weeks ago or something, like I must have been, it must have may have been Bleeping Computer. It could have been Ars Technica. One of the tech rags posted this recently, and it was like, we found the reason why all these AIs hallucinate. And the reason that they do is because they were instructed to deliberately. And that's like something that none of the companies like Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, like none of the Perplexity, none of them were coming out and saying, yes, that's actually the case, because they don't want to say that because, you know, the headlines, right? So, but the thing is, the LLMs were trained specifically to placate the user. They were trained specifically to instead of saying, no, you can't do that, or no, I don't know, or no, I don't understand, or no, I don't have enough data, or to prompt the user to say, if you want a real answer, you need to give me data points X, Y, and Z or whatever for me to calculate what you're after. They were literally told to just make stuff up to placate the user. And the problem with that is, if you're predicating the success of a defensive security apparatus on a technology that makes shit up, then like there's going to be some percentage of work that comes out of that process that's going to be just made up. And if the table stakes for that are they're the blue team, they're the ones that are going to be keeping Lapsus and Scattered Spider or to pick your poison APT out. What percentage of your defensive capability are you willing to burn because you have AI doing it instead of a person? Right. And from the attackers, see, it's different, because for the attacker side of things, if you're an attacker and you're throwing AI down, maybe you get 5% wins out of it, but 95% garbage.
Yeah.
If you're an attacker, then you just don't get shells and you can try again. Mm-hmm. But if you're a defender,
the stakes are higher.
then like you're telling me 95% of the time you're going to get weird nonsense out of your platform,
Yeah,
and
you're done.
your job is to be defending against
That's game
ransomware
over.
gangs, and you're fried, you're toast. So like,
Yeah.
I mean, if they if if some if someone with a bunch of GPUs decides that they want to train an LLM from scratch on how to do security, then you and I are probably in trouble.
Hmm.
But if their starting point is to say we're just going to take GPT-5 or Claude or one of these other ones and just start bolting security onto it, the problem of hallucinations, like this con we were just at, I mean, you went to the same talks I did, and like squarely half of the presenters mentioned in some capacity having to deal with or script around or program around hallucinations.
Yeah.
And so as long as that continues to be a problem, like our jobs are safe because
Yeah.
we're not going to be replaced by an apparatus that makes stuff up and tries to pass that off as real stuff. So like if there's a human being in the mix and the human being is acting as a assembly line sorting machine, separating the BS from the actual real insights, then that could be effective. But if the business decides we're
Not
just going to
likely.
eliminate, yeah, well, I mean, the business decides we're just going to eliminate the SOC, and
Right.
everything that comes out of like whatever SIM they have goes to the AI, and the AI makes decisions.
Of course it will. Yeah.
Well, then I recommend you get yourself a brokerage account and you get yourself a shitload of puts and shorts, because then we don't need to work anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, I want to make an analogy. I think that, did I just lose you? I think you just froze, or did I freeze?
Am I fried? Am I toast? Uh-oh.
Yeah, no, I didn't know if it was you or me, but in any case, I was just looking at the blinking lights on my router, but I think it may have just been a lapse. Really quick,
Yeah.
so you're right. I'm glad that you kind of honed in on the word impact, right? Because I asked,
Yeah.
which one would have the biggest impact. I didn't really qualify it, and you did a great job in responding to kind of really talk about the adverse impacts of over dependency. I think people really get lost in the fact that data drives good intelligence, and the decisioning used by artificial intelligence, if given bad data, is going to make horrible decisions, horrible analysis, and we're putting too much trust in that model. And to your point, there's a lot at stake there. Just paraphrasing a lot of what you mentioned. I also think that I think that's more complicated attackers like nation states and maybe well thought out like syndicates. They're looking to taint the data, the actual model that your defenses are actually using, right? So just kind of contaminating and tainting the data set. I think that that's something that's lost on a lot of the people out there, to not put that into their threat model so they can do validations on data integrity and things like that. But
Yeah.
let me go, because I want to wrap up on
Yeah.
this segment. Um, so on the topic of, so there's two parts I want to cover. One is AI as the new battleground, and two, some uncomfortable truths. Um, if you I had fun with the last question, I'm going to do a similar question. Let's say that you're a product manager and you've got a relational database that has all the keys to your kingdom and all your customer information, but you also have let's say, an agentive solution that operationally is responsible for sales, and it's maybe customer service. So you get two different business units within your company, Dan, that are basically using this agentive solution. What are you losing most sleep about? Still SQL injection, or some level of AI prompt injection? And again, I'm going to force you to, obviously you're concerned because you're a responsible product manager, Dan. We all know this. So you're going to be concerned about both. But in this day and age, from what you're seeing in terms of, real world attacks, if you had to begin somewhere, where are you losing the most sleep on?
I read an article 2 days ago about, oh, I can't remember who it was. Somebody got in trouble because they had this exact scenario where there was some agentic enabled chat bot, and it was hemorrhaging. Oh no, it was Copilot. It was Copilot. If you tickle Copilot the right way, then you can get private GitHub repository data out of it. Like,
Like,
period. Yeah. So like
GitHub Copilot.
yes, right now, like this is live or real. Yeah. So to answer your question, like right now, like Microsoft is dealing with this because this
Yeah.
news is like 4 days old or something.
Right.
And so the problem becomes you have taken this black box apparatus that makes its own rules, that has um, opaque guardrails, and you don't know where they are and what you're allowed to do, and it hallucinates, and you're taking this thing and you're plumbing your decision making processes through it. And so the thing that it gets the most wrong is, well, it hallucinates a lot. It can be jailbroken, and if you sweet talk it the right way, it'll tell you things it's not supposed to tell you. Like you can stick it like in the 50s or whatever. There was like old Star Trek episodes, or maybe it was the 60s, where there was like old Star Trek episodes where you could have like um, robots that you could get into a logic loop, and they'd explode. And now we're kind of there as a culture where now we have these AI platforms where if you sweet talk them the right way, they'll tell you secrets, and not just secrets, they'll tell you other people's secrets, because
Yeah.
in many circumstances, and like this one here, you have a multi-tenancy environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the problem just goes beyond there's data in my database that I don't want leaked. There is
Right.
now other people's data in the same database that I can get at as a bad guy. Or if I'm the product manager, the last thing that I want, like imagine, like I remember like last year, I think it was, there was a car dealership that had like some sort of chat bot that they put on, and and this made the news again, like somebody convinced the car dealership's chat bot to sell them a car for $1. And they argued, they even took it to court. They even argued that because the chat bot on the car dealership's website is run by the car dealership, the only reasonable expectation from the customer is that they wouldn't let the chatbot do anything that like a sales manager wouldn't do. And
Right.
so if you can get the chatbot to sell you a car for $1, then legally that dealership has to sell you the car for the $1 because it was their staff that made the arrangement.
Right.
And so like it's that sort of thing. It's imagine having a firewall where you have like 5 rules. You got port 80 gets natted in, you get port 25 gets natted into a different IP, you have port 8443 gets natted into some other thing, then you have like a DMZ with something else. Now imagine you have a firewall that, like a normal firewall, the rules flow from top to bottom. Now imagine that somewhere in there there's an AI rule, and the AI rule is just the Riddler. It's just question marks and cackling. So like, what happens when your data reaches that rule? There's no telling. Like, you don't know. And so fundamentally, the problem becomes we can't trust the output of this tool. We can't trust the output of this thing because it'll be not necessarily random, but maybe kind of random. Because like at a basis, it's designed to tell you what you want to hear and not the truth. And so that fundamental training issue affects literally everything else stacked on top of it. So like if I'm the product manager, my concern is going to be a mishmash of, it's going to lie to the customer, it's going to give the customer another customer's data, it's going to, depending on what, like if it's what is it, a RAG, is it like something or is it ROC, whatever the tool enabled version of like agentic AIs. If you give it a tool, can that tool be abused for remote code execution? Can that tool be abused to like launch shells? So like now we basically, instead of throwing burp at a web app, now we're social engineering the butler at the front door. And it's a lot easier to social engineer the butler at the front door than it is to like run burp, because to run burp you need to know stuff. And so like we have opened the Pandora's box of now anybody that can speak English fluently enough can go after these systems, because now the input is just talking to a robot and not knowing how to use a tool. So it's taking this of like, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think the systemic factors that are causing a lot of this stuff is the following. major corporations are demanding that AI gets adopted and implemented as soon as possible in order to have demonstrative cost savings and efficiencies and innovation, right? So everyone's talking about it. They are forming internal governance councils at major organizations, and there's a drive for innovation. There's a drive for automation. In doing that, a lot of these AI solutions, AI-based solutions, because I mean, everyone uses the word AI, but it could be, an MCP server. It could be, a plug-in into an IDE. It could be, an actual knowledge base or an LLM. But these AI components, they're not being adequately tested. And I think that the companies that are not investing in offensive security for AI abuse patterns are the ones that are going to really be shit in the bed, to be honest, right? There's a huge liability there that you mentioned some of the stuff there, like tenant hopping, information disclosure across tenancy, emulating a human for an operational goal, like a car salesman, as you mentioned, is just the 10% of it. Because in building that agentive, agent to emulate the car salesman, you have to share a lot of information. And it's in that architecture where people have no freaking clue, right? They're doing very bad architecture, which is compounding a lot of the risk and just also bad development. So I think that those are some of the uncomfortable truths. I hope, selfishly, I guess, for both of us and all the other entrepreneurs that are listening to this episode and the Dirty South Security podcast, Dan, is that, the AI, the need for the proliferation of AI adoption and development is going to need more attacker-centric and adversarial testing from people that actually care. It's not pointing AI offensive tools to agentive solutions that are created so that you can basically do the checkbox. Now, is that going to happen? Uncertainly. It's the cybersecurity industry, so most certainly it's going to happen, right? But I think that, this should present some opportunities for others that are smaller, that actually give two craps about what we do, to be able to, dive in and provide, more assurance for a lot of the companies that are building these types of products. What are your thoughts there to kind of close us out from that segment?
Yeah, I'd say whoever is the first org that starts from scratch is probably going to strike gold very quickly, because every solution, so like think of it this way, every single vuln scanner out there is literally just Nmap with a bunch of extra bells and whistles glued to it, right? If Nmap can't find a thing because like there's no NSC for it or it just doesn't get handled right, no amount of gluing shit onto Nmap is going to find the thing.
Right.
Like no amount of gluing shit onto Nmap is going to make Nmap better. Like you can't, there's no way to parse the XML that comes out of Nmap in a way to like make it more valuable, right? Mm-hmm. So like it's kind of the same problem with these LLMs. You can wrap the LLM's output in 10,000 layers of this and that, or you can ask it 10,000 different ways and get different things out. But like, it's essentially autocomplete on steroids at the end of the day. It's been trained on Wikipedia and like lots of, copyrighted internet works. But at the end of the day, it's an autocompletion machine. And autocompletion machines are not human beings, and they can't think of interesting, clever ways to do stuff. And so if you beat it, I mean, think of like the monkeys with the typewriters, right? If you beat GPT in the face with a brick for long enough, you might get something interesting out of it. But that's because you as a human being are looking at the output saying, oh, if I tweak this very slightly, then it becomes very interesting. Yeah. But like, if you operationalize that and take the human out of the loop, then you lose that piece. And so you don't get net new data. You just get, the way that hot dogs are made. You just put a bunch of pork parts in a blender and you whiz it into goo and you extrude the goo out into a shape. And like you get the same thing every time. And when AIs, and I've started seeing articles about this the last like 2 or 3 weeks, AIs using AI output as training input. And at that point, it starts getting ugly fast, because now you have one AI makes something up, the next AI takes that as gospel and then is trained on it. And now you have something in there that's like, it's just nonsense. And now we're just permanent acid trip. And now we're saying like, how much of the permanent acid trip do we want to install operationally, programmatically into our business processes? 5% of the time it's going to work great and it's going to look amazing and people are going to be patting themselves on the back and shaking each other's hands. But the rest of the 95% of the time, it's going to be a giant trash fire. And so their job is going to be Steve Jobs on stage with the very first iPhone, when there was actually 7 different iPhones that he had the sleight of hand and palm because after every single demo, the phone would crash. And so to sell the iPhones, they had to like fake it. The entire first iPhone, like Apple event, was bogus because there wasn't just one phone that did all of those things. They had 7 different phones, and it was meticulously rehearsed because their job is to sell phones. That's how they make money. Their job is to sell you a device that does what they say. Their job is to get you to pay. And once you paid, like lol, no take backsies. So like that's what we're up against. That process is going to happen again, and it's happening now with this AI stuff where what we're being shown is the 5% of when it works. And when it works great. But the trouble is that the other 95% of the time, it's on an acid trip. And we have to account for that.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I don't want to be, you and I, again, are roughly around the same age. So I don't want to be that, that person on the rocker being like, this AI fad, I mean, I think there is a lot of great innovation and automation and contextualization that can come with AI to be able to take structured data, correlate it to other, again, by a human, right? Architected by a human. And there's a lot of amazing things, but the problem is that there's a race condition of security slop making. And it's all for, just rushing to market, first to market, and it's all being prostituted by marketing. And, that's just another day in cybersecurity, right? I think it's up to us to be able, in shows like this, to be able to get the word out. Hopefully this, falls on the ears of others that can kind of understand what this market's really about, and to be able to pick the side that they want to be on. Maybe they want to be a VAR. Maybe they want to be like you and me and just kind of like, beat our fists into the wall and try to change the systemic nature of how this industry is very messed up from a consumerism standpoint, and how they elect to make purchases and decisions. And, there's a lot there, but I do want to end with just a hot take. I want to get your gut feeling on these 6 issues, and I want to hear, positive, negative, and just a quick like sentence or 2 remark on just whatever happens from the guys. So first, quick, rapid fire. Most cybersecurity certifications are worthless. True or false?
True.
The MITRE attack framework, Dan, useful or just intimidating wallpaper?
I wouldn't even call it intimidating wallpaper. I'd call it checkbox security and job security for MITRE.
Agreed. They're being defunded, I think, as of late. So zero trust is real, but 90% of zero trust products are snake oil. True or false?
50-50. Some of them work, the most don't. I mean, that's a whole rant, but yeah, I'd say half and half.
I agree with that percentage. This one's interesting. We could spend a couple of minutes on this one. Bug bounties, great for researchers or race to the bottom?
The Temple of Doom theme song and adults whipping children for free work. That's what bug bounties are. Yeah, let me show you something. If we're going on camera, this is my hack the Pentagon bug bounty coin that I got.
Oh,
you know how much I earned doing this bounty? $0. I found the second worst thing that the Pentagon had on deck.
Classic.
I was able to proxy through Bluecoats into a Marine Corps network from the internet unabated and scan their 172 LAN. They didn't pay me. They said it was out of scope, but they gave me a coin. That's bug bounties.
We got to make that answer to be the kind of like the infomercial for this episode. That's got to be it.
Yeah.
All right. Is offensive security becoming too accessible? Script kiddies with ChatGPT.
Yes, and I would say that happened like 7 years ago.
Yeah,
and it's just been getting worse since. There's no boundary to get in. Like if you want to be a doctor, you have to go to school and you have to like learn how to do doctor things. If you want to do hacker stuff, then you just watch the first season of Mr. Robot and suddenly you're an expert.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I hate those Twitter comments where they literally had, Mr. Robot on there and they said the question, why can't you be like him? I don't know why my camera is zoomed in. That's like very disturbing. Hold on a second. But did it back out? I think it did. I don't know.
A little
bit. All right. I'm gonna back up because that freaked me out.
That's amusing.
Yeah. So I think it was my hand gestures and all that stuff. But
Oh yeah.
anyway, it responded to one of them. So yeah, it said like, why can't you be like him? And I'm like, this person is not even really close to being the level of aptitude needed to be a really good like pen tester, right? My personal take is that in order to find dysfunction, you have to understand function. If you don't understand function, then you won't be good at identifying and figuring out where dysfunction lies. And that's the simple part of what I say everywhere I go.
There's a whole like, do you remember the second Matrix, the character, the Merovingian, where he
Yeah.
goes off on one about you don't have the why, and without the why, you just don't know. So go back to your oracle or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing, is the people are
That's
like,
it.
why can't you be like Mr. Robot? Well, because the breaking into of the thing is like 1/6 of the rest of the job. And
Yeah.
it turns out that the last like 60% is the report and the presentation and dealing with the customer. And like nobody wants to talk about that part because that's not the cool, sexy, amazing part. They want to talk about the first 5 or 10% where it's like, I did the exploit, I got the shell. And it's like, all right, cool. Now
Exactly.
what?
Right.
And so like the reason they say that is because they don't know. It's like I think we are now, as practitioners of security, feeling what doctors felt in the 90s when shows like Grey's Anatomy were coming out, or like you have
Right.
these, and like Scrubs, or you have these shows about doctors doing doctor things. And everyone's
Yeah.
like, oh, I want to be a doctor because I have access to drugs and I can cut people open and play with their guts and all this other stuff. And it's like, you guys, it's just a TV show. Like
Yeah.
they make stuff up. It's entertainment. It's not real. But yeah, it's just because they don't know, and it's because the stuff that we talk about that isn't the sexy stuff doesn't often get talked about. Because here we are, we're not talking about how you phrase reports, we're not talking about the language you use in your remediation guidance, and we're not like, none of that's on deck today. So
Right.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that doesn't, yeah.
Well, this last question, I'm interested to get your take. I have a
Sure.
sense, I'm hoping that it's going to be, as dark and disturbing as my answer would be, but the ethics of red teaming, is there a line? Where's the line?
What will the lawyers let me get away with? I have
Okay.
walked up to the point. We did a finance customer here in town, like, wow, close to a decade ago. Actually, before Phobos Group, where I met my co-founder, we did an engagement with that company
Yeah.
for a company here in town, whose front end web dev people. It was a hardcore Microsoft shop, so I think they were ASP.NET folks. They were
Yeah.
like, "There's no way you can get into our equipment," and I'm like, "Tell me more." And they were like, "We have it's cert only MTLS. There's 2FA. Like, you're not getting in." And I'm like, "All right. What'll you bet me?" And they're like, "Well, nothing, like, because we're confident you're never going to get in." I'm like, okay, cool. So it turns out that the way this organization operated is that they had a networking department that was all huddled into one like bullpen style area. And those folks, being both finance people and cert type folks, decided that it was a good idea to put all of their workstations, all the Ethernet drops for their part of the office, onto a physical VLAN that made them layer 2 adjacent to the co-location facility where all their servers lived. So if I walked across the office and I plugged my laptop into one of their empty visitor cubes, I now had layer 2 adjacency to the back end of everything, and I completely bypassed all the security measures that the devs were so proud of. And then I ran Responder for 5 minutes, got creds, used those creds to log into the MS SQL server that was serving their trading platform, and then just did a SQL query to search for the total number of assets that was being held. And I found one company that was like some super fancy pantsy rich guy mode 12-person wealth management firm that managed $4.1 billion of assets. So I took a screenshot of that and put that at the top of the report and asked only who wants to buy an island. So like they didn't authorize me to do a wire transfer, but I
Right.
literally walked up to the line where I'm like, here's all the banking information, here's the account and routing info, here's the names. Like literally I could copy paste from this database output and take $4.1 billion of cash out of the system if they said go for it.
Yeah.
But like, if the lawyers say that it's okay, then it's fine. If they say that it's not, then it's wire fraud and I'm on the front page of CNN. So like,
Yeah.
that's the line. The line is where the customer's lawyers draw it for you. And sometimes it's interesting and sometimes it's not. So like,
Yeah. And I think that sometimes, I mean, most of the time we're talking about post exploitation. is like what to do to exemplify how powerful your initial exploit was, because maybe it gives way to, a chained other set of exploits that allow you to do everything that you just mentioned. So definitely key.
A little bit of theatrics goes a very, very long way. And a little bit of theatrics can be incredibly potent. And so you don't need to actually do the wire fraud, but you just, one clever screenshot and one little zinger turn of phrase will get the point across very well.
Hopefully. I remember one time, this is similar 10 years ago, there was a CISO for the number 2 hamburger chain in the world. And the same sort of challenge was proposed. It says, we've had these reports every year for these outfits. And this lab, because in the hamburger or the fast food or the restaurant business, they have a lab that basically exemplifies their front of store. And anyway, the challenge was there. They said we have McAfee solid core. We have, a hardened the OS. We have deprecated credentials. We have, all this sort of security stuff running on it. And we've always had a clean bill of health, bigger outfits than us. And then, I was like, well, let me see if their bootloader is protected. And it wasn't. And then, then it's just getting on to the file system, taking keys and all that stuff. I've never seen a CISO for a very large multi-billion-dollar restaurant chain to be so upset on finding something that actually should be, it was actually easy to find out, and it bypassed solid core and all that stuff. So, going back to where we started, Dan, I think that you and I, we see a lot alike. We're passionate. We still beat our fists against the wall, right? It's that sort of like Fugazi, Minor Threat, 80s punk band type of like culture. And we're hoping that this was a good episode for all the youngins out there listening to the Dirty South Security Podcast. It was a pleasure to have you on, Dan. Hope to have you on again some point soon, and best of luck going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure being on. It's been a pleasure talking shop.
Thanks so much. Till next time. See ya.